Good morning and welcome to the Thursday morning teaching. Venerable children and our 5 new bhikshunis will return from Taiwan in about 2.5 weeks. And many of our friends have been concerned hearing about the big earthquake that happened in Taiwan. That happened on the East Coast, right? And the bhikshunis are training at a monastery on the West Coast. So they did feel the earthquake, but it did not affect the area where they were, at least not in any noticeable way. So thank you for your concern. And we can continue to hold those who have been affected by that earthquake in our prayers and dedications. And also, just a heads up to watch our website for some ordination reflections that were written by the new bhikshunis. They'll be posted up on the website in the next few days. And they're just beaming with gratitude and feeling the responsibility of what they've just done. So it's very inspiring to read what they've written. Okay, so let's begin as usual with the abbreviated recitations. We'll have a little bit of silent meditation and then I'll set a motivation. We'll go from there.
Namo Guru Vyaha Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Vyaha Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Vyaha Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I confess all my destructive actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the virtues of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until cyclic existence ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate all the virtues of myself and others to the Great Awakening. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, for land, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this this pure land. The objects of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, friends, enemies, and strangers, my body, wealth, and enjoyments, I offer these without any sense of loss. Please accept them with pleasure and inspire me and others to be free from the three poisonous attitudes. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Glorious and precious root Guru, sit upon the lotus and moonseed on my crown, guiding me with your great kindness. Bestow upon me the attainments of your body, speech, and mind, the eyes for whom the vast scriptures are seen, supreme doors for the court who are crossed over to spiritual freedom, illuminated whose wise means vibrate with compassion. To the entire line of spiritual mentors I make request. Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha. Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha. Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soham. 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 Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soham.
So to help us cultivate our motivation this morning, I was reflecting on Geshe Topke's motivation yesterday when he began teaching on Kamalashila's stages of meditation. And he reminded us that we're under the control of our mind right now. We could say the mind is the boss. It has two followers, two slaves, our body and our speech. And unfortunately, our mind is also often under the control of afflictions. So that means, therefore, that our body and speech are often under the control of afflictions. So if we're trying to practice ethical conduct, if we're trying to cultivate renunciation, bodhicitta, wisdom in our practice, it's important that we gain control over our mind. We need to know our mind very well and then gain some control by understanding the disadvantages of afflictions and understanding the advantages of their antidotes, the advantages of virtuous states of mind and actions. Otherwise, we just follow after whatever arises in the mind. When anger arises, we'll follow after anger, all sorts of conceptions, exaggerations. And that doesn't bring happiness, the happiness that we're seeking, the happiness that we're longing for. Another example is jealousy. When we're jealous, we're overly concerned with material gain and respect from others. So much so that it's hard to bear when anyone else has something we want, something physical or maybe a relationship, or has the admiration of others, has opportunities we don't. Or we can even feel fearful that someone's going to get something that we want. But if we really think about a mental state like jealousy, it makes us look so foolish in the eyes of others. You know, we can probably all think of experiences where someone was under the control of jealousy, and we can, you know, from the outside, you can see that. And when we're jealous, we create a lot of negative karma by harming others, by hurting their feelings. And that causes us to lose our own self-respect. And jealousy also goes against our values, against our integrity. And if we really look into it, when we're jealous, we're often jealous over worldly concerns, things just of this life, things that aren't really that important, things that don't bring us the lasting happiness that we're looking for. So when we recognize that, then we can turn our mind, we can use mind training to turn our mind and train ourselves to rejoice in the good fortune, in the good opportunities, in the good qualities that we see in others. And they're there. Everyone has good qualities. So throughout the day, we aspire to stay aware of what's happening in our mind, and especially trying to be aware of when afflictions are getting the upper hand, when they're controlling us, instead of the values that we've identified that we want to follow, the virtuous states of mind that we aspire to cultivate. And then we're more likely to be mindful of the things we want to engage in and naturally turn away from the things that we don't want to be involved with, that bring us harm and suffering. And so this is what Dharma practice really comes down to, especially in the face of problems. So slowly, we extend our capacity to do that. And as we develop more capacity in this way, we naturally become of greater and greater benefit to all beings. It's just a natural byproduct. So let's cultivate a bodhicitta motivation for continuing to engage in these teachings on mind training, so that we can bring about the results that we're aiming for and truly develop more of our capacity to benefit more and more beings each day. So I appreciate the conversation that we had last week, especially around renunciation. Venerable Chuni brought up the situation that often when people are still kind of new in their practice, it's easy to understand true suffering. You can get some sense of that, and also true causes of suffering. You start identifying the afflictions in the mind, but we don't yet have a lot of the rewards of our practice. And so we were talking after class that it's a bit like being on a trapeze, and you're tempted to let go of one ring, but you can't quite see the next ring yet. And so it feels like a risk. That if we let go of the things that we think bring us happiness, or things that do bring us happiness, temporary happiness, yeah, it's a bit like a risk of what if I let go and there's nothing there to catch me. So Venerable Chuni was saying it's important that we find ways to prove to ourselves that there are things, that we do get benefits from our practice. And I really appreciated what you brought up, Venerable Nawang, and that is that in your own experience, you found that trying to force yourself to let go of attachments and things that you identify as pleasurable didn't work. That kind of forcing does not work. And we've probably all done that to some degree at different points in our practice. But then you found that as you continued with your practice, some of those things just naturally began to fall away. And so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as we practice mind training or whatever it is that we're doing in the Dharma, that if we're forcing, there's some kind of aggression there against ourselves, and it doesn't work. Because oftentimes what happens is, whatever our habit is before we engage with the Dharma, we bring that habit into the Dharma. So if we're already pushing ourselves, beating ourselves in our lay life, or ordinary life before we've met the Dharma, we're likely to do that in our Dharma practice as well. So it's good to be on the lookout for that. But I also appreciated that Venerable Chuni was encouraging us to prove to ourselves. And so Venerable Kunshok did that. The next day he led a beautiful meditation where he actually was reflecting on, well, what kind of benefits do I get from my Dharma practice right now? So I'm just going to share a few of those. It was actually a pretty long list. But he said he included the joy of having a less reactive, more flexible mind. So even very new in the Dharma, we can start recognizing that in our practice, that our mind does become a little bit less reactive, or at least if it's reactive, we know it's reactive. And that's progress, because we probably reacted for many years without recognizing that was a problem. The joy of blamelessness that comes from living an ethical life when we refrain from the 10 non-virtues and keeping our precepts well. And that brings a sense of ease, a sense of integrity. Yeah, and it brings self-confidence when we find ourselves identifying what are the values I want to live by and how am I going to do that. The joy of freedom from unwholesome states of mind when the mind abides more and more in virtue. The joy of cultivating positive thoughts towards others, and that naturally brings about a sense of connection and warmth and finding the appealing aspects of people, rather than picking out faults, which we tend to do. The joy of developing the wish to benefit others, that reduces our self-centered, anxious mind. And the joy of experiencing more equanimity towards different people and different situations. As we're learning about the afflictions and starting to apply antidotes, that does reduce the peaks of the joys and the lows of the lack of joy, or the pain of the afflictions, let's say, so that eventually there's more of this middle ground where we can live, not so much the highs than the lows. And that is peace of mind that is worth a lot. You can't buy that. You can't get that at a pharmacy. You have to cultivate that. And so I think one of the challenges that we have as Dharma practitioners is that it's hard to take a picture of any of this and put it on Instagram and show your friends and say, here, look, this is what I'm doing in my life. This is what's important to me. like you can do with a vacation or a new car or whatever you're posting on Instagram these days, I don't know. So that's one of the challenges, but where it lands is our own appreciation of those qualities. Rather than the excitement that comes from new things, new opportunities, new adventures, what we're aiming for with Dharma practice and cultivating our mental consciousness is more of a steadiness of our mind, steadiness of our mental consciousness, not so much being drawn off by the sense pleasures. So we have to give that some thought to really start appreciating that. And so I thought this exercise was so beneficial for you, and I think the people who listen to it, that it's a wonderful exercise to encourage everyone listening to sit down and really think about what are some of the benefits, what are some of the joys that I have gotten from my Dharma practice, even if I'm not at the level of full renunciation or haven't developed bodhicitta. But what is it, even from day one? Something keeps us coming back to the Dharma. So what is that? And the more we can identify that, the more we can appreciate that, and even use it as a touchstone. Venerable Children often says to us, be really clear about one thing in the Dharma that you can come back to when you start having doubts. She says that often. So whatever topic it might be bodhicitta, it might be calm abiding, it might be whatever it is that gets your interest. And be very clear about how beneficial that is in your own experience, so that there are going to be inevitable times where our practice feels dry, or we can even stop practicing sometimes. We had a recent visitor who said during the winter she just stopped practicing and she really missed it but couldn't quite get back to it on her own. So that will happen to us. But if we have this list and we keep it in a prominent place and we come back to it, then we're proving to ourselves, as Venerable Chuni was saying, we're proving to ourselves the benefit of our Dharma practice, even though we can't take a picture of it and post it somewhere. Okay. So you want to put up that first slide? This is a cartoon that I think it was Venerable Kadro who sent around, and I love it. This is what we do. We try to tweak our samsara to make it happier. And so this is what we're doing when we don't prove to ourselves that Dharma practice is helpful. We're just decorating our cell, making our little prison a little more comfortable. Okay, so the next slide. Today we're going to look at the next 3 ways that Rinpoche is advising us to transform our problems into the path, using problems to eliminate pride. In this way, our arrogance is dispelled when we experience problems, and to discover the benefits of rejoicing. We can find joy is found in virtue, and to purify past negative karma. So this matches up, if you want to put the next slide up, this matches up again with Shantideva's verse 21 in chapter 6, that arrogance or pride is dispelled. So Rinpoche has a kind of a unique way of matching these up with, like for instance, arrogance is dispelled. He's saying, let's use our problems to eliminate arrogance or pride. So let's begin with that one. Arrogance, or what we call afflicted pride, that's one of the 6 main afflictions, true origins of suffering, one of the 6 main afflictions, which we've seen all afflictions disturb our mind, disturb our peace of mind. And so here it's important to distinguish between healthy pride. We all need a healthy sense of pride, a healthy sense of confidence that comes from our integrity, actually, and is necessary. We need to be convinced of our abilities in our Dharma practice. We need to have some confidence. But let's contrast that with afflicted pride, which is defined as based on grasping at the view of the personal I. So it's based in ignorance. It's right there in the definition. And it strongly grasps at an inflated or superior image of ourselves when we observe things like our good qualities or our wealth, our youth, whatever it might be. And keep in mind, there are those 7 types of pride. I find it so helpful to read through that list. It's humbling, and that's the point. It needs to be humbling. So I'm curious, do you feel confident that you can identify pride when it arises in your mind? Sometimes? Sometimes? Yeah, more or less. No? Okay. Did any of you recognize moments of pride or arrogance in your mind this last week? Thanks for your honesty. I did too. Huh? It's every day. That's an honest statement. Yeah, and I think often we feel uncomfortable admitting that we have pride. There's a sense of shame associated with it, but it's as common as anger and attachment and all the other afflictions. So I wonder why that is, that there's this sense of shame or embarrassment that we don't like to admit that we have pride, and yet we do. And I know in my own situation, I've had embarrassing reckonings throughout my Dharma practice, especially in retreat, where all of a sudden I will discover, oh my gosh. And it's a bit like walking around with toilet paper stuck to your shoe or something. You're assuming that everybody's seen this already, but you were the last to discover it. Sometimes that can be really disconcerting, like it's kind of like that. It takes your breath away, like your stomach just drops out. It might even be mortifying, There are moments where you're shaking, you've had those moments. Yeah. So somehow recognizing pride or arrogance feels different than recognizing some of the other afflictions. And I wonder myself if this might be especially painful because we like being right about almost everything. And especially about ourselves. We like to think we know who we are, and then all of a sudden we discover we're not. And that can be a little disconcerting. I read parts of a book called Being Wrong. It was a very interesting book by a woman named Catherine Schultz, and she said, a whole lot of us go through life assuming that we are basically right, basically all the time, about basically everything. Can you relate to that? How many of you think you're better than an average driver? Some of you don't drive. What's interesting is that when they've done studies about this, or other qualities, they find that about 80% of people think they're better than the average driver. Now, that doesn't add up. Somehow the math isn't quite right. So, and even people from Asian countries, when they measure them against things that they might, feel good about, like humility, more than 80% feel they're more humble than other people. So it's across the board. I think it's just a natural part of being human, or a natural part of being a sentient being. The sad part about pride, I think, is that it really is a cover-up for feeling insecure. And so it's helpful to recognize that. The thing about pride is it pretends to be helpful to us, like as if looking down on someone is going to make us feel better about ourselves. That's really sad when you think about it. But a truly confident person has no reason to look down on another person, because a truly confident person is someone who's already very humble. In a sense, they know their good qualities. They're aware of their good qualities without being arrogant, but they're also, I think, aware of their limitations. And so a person who has that balanced view of themselves is more likely to have a balanced view of others as well. And so we can feel safe around people who have that valid sense of self-confidence, who lack arrogance, who have more of a sense of humility. And so that would be a quality that probably all of us would want to cultivate. And so when we think about this, that really pride is a way of covering up our sense of insecurity, then we can develop more compassion for ourselves and really begin to address the problem where it is, rather than looking outside of ourselves and belittling others. And so that comes from, as Venerable has often said, and I really appreciate her clarity about this, that when we take time to identify our values, we know the values that we want to live by, and then we start living by them. That helps us to live within our integrity. And then naturally, we start feeling better about ourselves. Because what undermines our sense of confidence is really not feeling good about when we've been angry, when we've been jealous, and we've all been jealous too. That's another one. It's not maybe one of the 6 afflictions, but it's a common one. So the more we can do that, then the more compassion we can have for ourselves, and the more confidence we can develop in ourselves. Also being aware that a lot of our tendency to have arrogance and look down on others comes from that place of insecurity. Yeah, I'm just sorry, just lost my train of thought. So we can have more confidence, more compassion for others too, rather than, you know, when okay, right, that's what it was. When we're on the receiving end of someone else's pride, someone else's doing their I'm right trip on us, then we can have compassion for them, because we can guess where it's coming from. May not be all the time, but we can guess where it's coming from. Next slide. So understanding and remembering this, then we can develop a strong determination to think, I'm going to cut off pride, the enemy that destroys the myriad good qualities. I'm going to cut off this evil, self-centered thought that is careless about other living beings. Rinpoche likes this word evil, the evil thoughts of the 8 worldly concerns. So if that word doesn't work for you, then translate it into something that does. You know, negative we could put in there instead. So the fact is that pride, like all afflictions, pride tends to be, or pretends to be, our best friend, our good friend, looking out for us. But actually it just brings endless problems, and it distances ourselves from others. So by remembering more of the faults, we will naturally, organically want to get rid of this attitude. So the bulk of this section of the text is, or chapter 5, is looking at the faults and disadvantages of afflicted pride or arrogance. So if we think about what is pride doing, it's often it's looking for the problems or the shortcomings of others, and it's exaggerating our own good qualities above and beyond what's there. So he says, how do we antidote this? Well, we can think about our own mistakes. We can think about our own problems. When we recollect those, then pride doesn't arise nearly as much. What a concept, thinking about our own problems. That's contrary to what we usually like to do. But we have to be careful, because this is very different. We think about the purpose of why we would do that. We're trying to counter pride. The purpose is not to disparage ourselves or to belittle ourselves or to make ourselves feel bad. That's not the point. But rather thinking about the faults. Sorry, I'm going to sit here and breathe for a moment. I'm making a mistake on film. Yeah. So problems actually benefit us. They prevent us from developing pride. So it's a good thing. Actually, when I went back to look at the video from last week to catch some of what you two were saying, I noticed that someone had written in the comments section, she's a bit naive at times. And I thought, thank you. You're helping me with my pride. It's probably true. We're all probably naive at different times. I just happen to be sitting up here doing it in public. Okay. Yes, please.
I would like to support your naivete, if you have any, because I actually am quite naive a lot of times, and I've been pointed that out, and I actually think if you're going to fall one way, better to fall that way than the way where you fall, where you're kind of cynical. That's something I don't want to be. So I have kind of accepted that, and I've kind of, I work to be more clear, have more clarity.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to fall one direction, I'd rather fall that way, because then I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt a lot of times. And people say you're naive, but I'd rather fall that way.
Yeah.
So I support your
Thank you.
naivety, but I'm not sure that I've seen it.
Okay. Well, feel free to point it out to me. So just continuing to think about the faults of pride. Pride causes us to rejoice when others have problems, and that's not the kind of rejoicing that we want to cultivate in our practice. And for a bodhisattva, or even an aspiring bodhisattva like us, pride prevents our development of compassion. And so that's a big hindrance to the bodhisattva path and cultivating bodhicitta. Compassion's a necessary ingredients for our bodhisattva deeds. So instead, we can use our problems to develop compassion for others who have similar problems. And we'll get to that. We're going to talk about Tonglen next week or the week after. One of the things about recognizing that when we have problems, we can feel more compassion for people who have similar problems. I remember the first time I had a sinus infection, a really bad sinus infection. Oh, from that moment on, I had so much more compassion for people who suffer with sinus infections. Or 2 years ago, when I ruptured a disc, all of a sudden I had a whole new level of compassion for people with back problems. You can probably think of situations yourself where maybe you found yourself being judgmental of someone who had a particular problem, and then you developed that problem. All of a sudden, a whole new level of compassion for people in that situation. Yes.
This might be a generational thing, but I used to just get so out of shape when I'd have my family, the elders in our family, sit around and talk about their aches and pains. I'd be like, oh my God, what a waste of time. That's not that bad, as I'd be running around in circles around them, you know? Well, guess what? It's a really deep practice not to sit around talking about your aches and pains when you get old. So I was like, wow, you know, that was a way for them to give empathy to each other and to see the similarity between each other. But boy, I had no tolerance for these old people talking about all the things that were going wrong. So it has taken me a few decades, but I really do, I understand now, because it does take some mindfulness and some restraint not to go there.
Yeah.
As part of our community's aging, you know, to help each other heal and work our way through it, but not to kvetch about it and just sit there all day and just yak about it.
Yeah. Yes.
Venerable, could you talk about the relationship between pride and insolence? I want to be friends with spiritual teachers and would like to understand the problems, disrespect of that, and says, I feel naive too.
Can someone define insolence for me? I'm not sure.
Disrespectful behavior.
Yeah. Actually, one of the biggest faults of pride is that we close our mind towards being able to learn from other people. And this is especially dangerous in relation to spiritual teachers. There's a saying that you often hear from Tibetan teachers that pride doesn't grow on the peaks, it grows in the valleys, the deep green valleys. Oh, sorry. Say it again in the microphone.
Pride dwells in the peaks where
Right.
the wind is blowing, no fertile ground.
Yep.
The wisdom and the good qualities come from the valleys down deep in the ravines.
Yeah. So when we're full of pride, it's like we're a big balloon. In fact, go to the next slide. Oops. Okay, it'll come. When we're filled with pride, it's like we're a balloon, and then the Dharma just kind of bounces off of us. I'll bet some of us in this room have experienced this, maybe when we're listening to each other teach, or when we're listening to certain teachers teach and they have a different style than what we're accustomed to. very easily a sense of pride can come up, and then the mind is just closed, and then we're blocked off from being able to benefit from the pure Dharma that they're trying to impart to us. So Venerable Kadro addressed this so beautifully when she was teaching on relying on the spiritual teacher recently. Do you remember? She was saying, you know, maybe it's good just to recognize, it caught my attention because this has happened to me in the past. It caught my attention. She said, just recognize that different teachers have different styles, and we can just appreciate that they have different styles. I'll have to go back and check exactly what she said. But when she said that, there was a sense of relaxation in my mind, because, you know, you can give yourself a hard time if you find yourself resisting what someone's saying. And then when you can find a way to relax and really listen, then you get the benefit of what they're bringing across. So I don't know if that exactly answers the question there, but pride is definitely something we want to get on top of, developing humility. And like I was saying earlier, I think some of the best ways to do that is to be very clear about what are my good qualities in a humble way, in a realistic way. We all need to know our good qualities, and we all have good qualities, but also being aware of our limitations without falling to the extreme of denigration or self-hate or discouragement, things like that. And so that keeps the mind more even keel, more realistic. And then we're going to be more receptive to learning from anyone. In fact, that's one of the benefits of being truly humble, is that we can learn from every sentient being. Every sentient being, yeah. Like Venerable Chuni's BBC the other day, we can learn from bees, we can learn from ants. We can learn something from every person. Also, Venerable Chodron has told this story about going to one of the early enlightenment experience celebrations, and she gave herself the job or the task to try to meet with every person that was there, something like 100 people, and to have a meaningful conversation with each of them. And to do that, we have to value the person that's in front of us and really listen and be skillful about how to find a way to connect. That requires a lot of humility. So if we have this attitude that we can't learn from somebody, that's a red flag that there's some pride in our mind. Yeah, Venerable Chuni?
Just something I heard in the question, I haven't seen it again, but to say I want to be friends with spiritual mentors has depending on what they mean by that term, friends, kind of as a setup for this problem. Right? Do you hear what I'm saying? And that may not be the issue, but I just thought it might be worth bringing up.
Okay. All right. So if that was inherent in the question, then, you know, our relationship with spiritual mentors is a very different kind of relationship. It will not be the normal kind of relationship that we're used to. So if we're expecting that, we're going to be disappointed. And it's not healthy, actually, to expect that kind of friendliness or casualness with someone that we're seeing as a teacher in our life. What else would you add to that, Venerable Chuni? Please, go ahead.
But within the context of insolence, you know, if we are really wanting to be friends with our spiritual mentor, we want to take them out for coffee, we want them to be friendly with us, then our capacity to be, quote, insolent is going to really rev up, because we're going to treat them like they're another buddy. Maybe a buddy we admire very, very much, but still we're going to put them in the same category as anybody else we would be hanging out with. And then immediately what will follow is, well, not just judgment, but also just inappropriate behavior or assumptions about how to be in relation to the teacher. So it's not like we have to walk with kid gloves. Yeah, dick gloves, backwards spankings. We don't have to walk around with kid gloves around the teachers, but as soon as we want to be friends with them, we're already trying to take something from them that they're not really, it's not their job to give.
Yeah.
And from that, from my own experience, insolent behavior follows.
So if that's the case, then it's probably good to go back and review some of the teachings on how to rely on a spiritual teacher. There'll be a lot of information in there along that line. Shane, did you want to add something?
Oh, this is just going back to pride. When I have, confrontation with someone and I'm trying to get over it, afterwards, and I'm trying to apply antidotes, they want happiness and don't want suffering and so on, just as I don't. But constantly, until I've worked with my mind more, I notice that, that thought, the grasping it, I have to win, in my mind constantly over and over again. I think I have it. I'm pretty, confident in my resolution in my mind, but it keeps coming back. Well, I have to win, I have to, so I've kind of thought about wearing away at this self-cherishing has helped with that, getting over that stuff quicker, faster.
Yeah. Thank you. And that's a deep practice too, working with self-centeredness. Another antidote, I know we're talking about the problems, but another antidote to pride is to thinking about some of the karmic results of being proud. Typically, we're born in servitude. We'll be born more like a servant of somebody. We won't be the person in charge. Often, people are born short in stature. Now this is just one possibility. It's not that all the short people in the world have, I didn't mean to imply that. One of the worst things is that we will easily generate pride again in this life and future lives as well. And then we'll be on the receiving end of other people's pride. So if you do feel like you're often being looked down on, perhaps purifying all the actions that we've created motivated by pride would be helpful, a helpful antidote. Okay. So let's look at some of the antidotes that Rinpoche is suggesting here. He says, control pride by reflecting on our own mistakes. So we've thought about that. He says, consider how little we know in general. That's really humbling when you do take time to think about it. There's so many fields of expertise in the world right now. How many of them have we mastered? Probably not many. Consider how little we know about the Dharma. It's so easy to get the words, right? Especially if we've been around a little bit of time. It's easy to get the words, but has our Dharma study actually brought about many stable changes in our mind and our behavior? Has it actually helped us attain ultimate happiness? And thinking about how much we know compared to Buddhas, that's an interesting exercise. If you think how Buddhas know all phenomena simultaneously, okay, that can really put things into perspective quickly. Also, if we're still suffering because of problems, that shows that we don't understand the true nature of our mind. So thinking in this way can help to reduce our pride. So remember, we're not using these antidotes to disparage ourselves, to feel bad about ourselves, to denigrate ourselves, not at all. But when we're actively working with pride as an affliction that's arising in our mind, these are some ideas that we can investigate and explore and see how they work for us. Okay, any comments before we go to the next one? Yes.
Well, it was already mentioned that, when you have problems like physical problems of pain and stuff, you can relate to others. But it goes just as much for when we're overwhelmed by afflictions. Then when we recognize that we've been overwhelmed by afflictions, we can have more, less judgmental about others when they are, and more compassion. and it really can help with our pride, because we study the afflictions not to see which ones we have, but to see them, because we all, until we become Arya beings, we have all the afflictions, including pride, but including all of these. And so when they arise in our mind, manifest, we can use that to diminish our pride and to have more tolerance of others that are being, when they're afflicted.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, when you were saying that, I was thinking, yes, we all have 84,000 afflictions. So that could be a good thing to keep in mind when we find we have pride arising. Yeah, and what you're saying is true. When we have been overwhelmed with anger, it's so much easier to give someone else some space when they're overwhelmed with anger, in those moments that we can remember to do that. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Just wanted to share something that someone said to me yesterday. They said, jealousy is part of your pride. And it really struck me, because I thought, oh, I don't have, I have jealousy, I don't have pride. And I thought, but they go together, they're just ends on a spectrum. And it just made me think how, if I think I should be the best, then there's jealousy, and how much they go together. And you can't really have one without the other.
Yeah, good point. And something else that has come more to my mind is how linked miserliness is with jealousy. Because as soon as we're jealous, we don't want someone else to have what we want or what we have. And so then we become miserly as well. So there's a whole cascading of a number of those afflictions that overlap and support each other. Yeah. Yes. Miserliness and jealousy?
I don't understand how jealousy and
pride. You want
pride
to
go
explain how you
together.
understood it?
If you could explain it more, that would help, because I'm not really seeing it yet.
Oh,
Thank
I
you.
understand it as when I am lower than others, I have jealousy. When I'm higher than others, I have pride. But this can happen in terms of different qualities. So in some aspects, I have a lot of jealousy. In other aspects, I do have pride. So to say that jealousy is part of your pride, to me, it says that those two are kind of inseparable. And that as long as I have jealousy, when I am in a situation, when I feel superior, then I'll have pride. Because I have that way of seeing myself in relationship to others, or that habit of comparing myself to others.
Yeah, it all comes from comparing, doesn't it? Yeah.
They don't have to be on the opposite ends of the spectrum either. You can be jealous because I should have had that, because I'm better, and you have both at the same time. Yeah, that comes up, Why are they getting praised when I should have been the one that got praised? Or why did they get this or that, They can be very, very tied together in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also that inverted pride that I think shows up when we have jealousy. So yeah, maybe along those lines. So it's good to go back and review those 7 types of pride. Okay, I think we need to go on. We have 2 more I'm trying to cover today. All right, so then Rinpoche includes a section called the benefits of rejoicing. And when I was thinking about Shantideva's verse, there is, the last line is taking joy in virtue. So I think there's a lot of leeway of how we can understand that last line in Shantideva's verse. But here he says, if we just think about what is rejoicing, it's that genuine good feeling of happiness and joy from appreciating our own and others' qualities. And Zopa Rinpoche is a big fan of rejoicing. In fact, when he's teaching people how to do the Lama Tripa, the Guru Puja practice, he really encourages people to stop and rejoice, spend time. So, and in this section, he gets right into the benefits of rejoicing. And I think the reason he brings it up is it's in line with what we've just been talking about, is that the practice of rejoicing can prevent the arising of pride and jealousy and anger. So think about that. If our mind is filled with a virtuous state of mind, like really looking for the positive qualities, there's not going to be room for this comparing and jealousy and miserliness, things like that. So he's encouraging us that whenever we hear of anyone having any kind of happiness or success, that we should get into the habit of rejoicing, just taking a moment to really feel happy that that person has gotten what they wanted. He says, always practice rejoicing for others, whether your friend or your enemy, even about samsaric success. So if someone's been successful, like in a worldly way, maybe in their business or their career, their work life, or even if someone has found a partner, we can just think, well, it's a worldly thing, but how wonderful that you found something that you were identifying as something that would bring you happiness, and now you have it. So that's really wonderful, and really rejoicing for that. Or, around here, we can rejoice when someone makes pancakes for breakfast. We can really rejoice that that person had joyous effort to get up in the morning and make pancakes. Or when we find our donka that's been missing in the laundry for the last couple of weeks, we can rejoice. That person found their donka. That's wonderful. Okay. You got to find places to rejoice, right? Next slide. He says, if you cherish only yourself, you cannot experience happiness. But if you cherish others as you cherish yourself, happiness arises naturally. When you cherish others as you cherish yourself, if someone finds the happiness they were seeking, you naturally feel happy without any need to think of reasons. When something good happens to anyone, you naturally feel happy. So isn't every positive trait, every positive experience or quality the result of past good karma, positive karma? So we can rejoice that whenever someone has success or we recognize their good qualities, that's a ripening of their virtue that they put effort into. And so because everything is coming from a positive state of mind created in the past, then that's a valid basis for our rejoicing. Even if it's something about, worldly success, it can still be valid. So we can train ourselves, when we see someone who has a beautiful face or a very handsome physique or, even something like that, we can think, well, what's the cause of that? That comes from patience. We can rejoice in their previous practice of patience. Or people with wealth. It's amazing how much wealth some people have accumulated in this life. Some people have inherited it, some people have worked for it and brought it to themselves in that way. But that would have come through a lot of generosity in previous lives, especially if it comes very easily. We can rejoice when people have more Dharma knowledge than we do, that maybe they've created different causes in previous lives, that it comes very naturally for them, or they put in a lot of hard work. We can rejoice in that instead of comparing and feeling jealous and those sorts of things. Or, like if someone has a really good winter retreat and they're just beaming after their winter retreat and you're feeling like, oh, I just wasted a lot of time, we can rejoice. They've created a lot of good karma. And, I need to continue creating causes myself to have similar results. But in the meantime, I'm really happy that you had a good retreat, and I'm not going to get jealous about it. So this practice of rejoicing is a practice of cherishing others. Think about it. We feel, it creates a good feeling between ourselves and others, and increases our affection for others, increases our sense of connection with them. Yeah.
See, when rejoicing, lots of excitement arises, which feels agitated. How do you remain calm while rejoicing so gladness maintains the quality of serenity?
That's a good question. Well, I would think that, just like I was saying, if we're using reasoning to understand where those good qualities come from, that's going to keep us out of excitement. That's going to be more grounding, I would think, because we're thinking about, look, this is a result of something this person has done. They've created good karma. And then we're appreciating that they have created the causes and gotten the results. So that's very different than just kind of a giddy excitement over someone getting something. Excitement tends to have some attachment involved in it. So where's that attachment coming from? That would be something to investigate. Is anyone else? Yeah, Venerable Tarpa, yeah, something to add?
So,
One thing I learned from Darshan Rinpoche, which I don't know if it answers their question exactly, but it helped me a lot, is whenever it's nice when you're doing something together with other people and you rejoice when you're done. And what he did is he did it very quickly. Like we always offered service on Saturdays at that monastery. And when we'd get done doing something, he would just say, "We did it." And it was that quick, that short, that sweet. And we rejoiced in what we did. And it was always we. It was never I. It was always we did it. We always recognized, we would recognize something, and then that was the end. And so it was kind of short. So maybe if you just do it briefly, it won't overtake your serenity.
So, yeah.
And I do actually think that it's a good practice to include others. And, when I think that was really a nice thing to recognize. That it's because that is the reality. You don't do anything on your own, really. I mean, so.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, you might be the one part of a cog in a long chain of things that made something come about.
Yeah.
You might be the person who's the spokesperson or the visible person or whatever it is, but it's usually not very what can come about without.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we are encouraged to rejoice in our own good qualities as well, but within the context or the awareness that also came about due to so many other causes and conditions from others. Yeah, thank you, that's helpful. Okay. So rejoicing is something that you can do anywhere, anytime. In fact, I think Lama Yeshe used to say, you can just lay down on your couch, be very comfortable, and just use your mind rejoicing. This is one of the criticisms of Shantideva, is that he was just laying around all the time, but he was very, very active in what he was doing with his mind. And probably a part of his practice was rejoicing. But rejoicing, think about it, rejoicing doesn't take any special equipment. It doesn't cost anything. That's right. It doesn't really require a lot of physical exertion. It's mental. It's a mental practice that we're doing. It's a very quick way to create a lot of extensive merit. So at the end of any virtuous thing that we do, we can just take a couple of seconds to rejoice in what we've just done, the virtuous activities we've just engaged in. That will increase the merit that we're then able to dedicate. And it brings such a genuine feeling of happiness and joy, expansion in the heart. It feels good to do it. It does make the mind more levitated. So it's a good thing to do when we're feeling a bit depressed or discouraged, to just take some time and focus on rejoicing. Rejoicing also helps us overcome feeling discouraged and helps us to maintain steady joy in our practice. And also there's this thing that we see in the Lam Rim, that if we rejoice in someone whose qualities are greater than ours, we get half the merit. And I don't know about this math. I don't know if it's exactly this way, but it is encouraging. It does encourage us to take time to engage in rejoicing. If we rejoice in someone who has similar qualities as we do, then we get equal merit that they've gotten. I don't know if you get the whole merit. That seems a little bit too easy. And then if you rejoice in someone who has what might be considered lesser merit than we have, then we get, all their merit? Twice their merit, thank you. Twice their merit. So it's easy. It doesn't cost anything. You can do it anywhere. It doesn't require any special equipment. Doesn't take much time even, but it brings about a lot of benefit. So do any of you have a daily practice of rejoicing, or it's something that you do as you walk along in Venerable Losang?
Everybody in this room knows this, but I want to say for the people online that we, at the beginning of our stand-up meeting, go around and everybody says what they rejoiced in the day before. And you don't have to be in a stand-up meeting to do that. You just do that in your morning. And it's good to rejoice in virtuous things, because rejoicing is kind of if you rejoice in negative things, it's a negative
Good point.
mental state. And I usually try to bring up something that I rejoice in that is Dharma connected. I might say, oh, I rejoiced in seeing a frog or something, but I also rejoiced in the BBC and the teachings and the book I'm reading.
Good point. Yeah, Shane?
Never really thought about it in rejoicing way, but like if I see people that are happy doing, whatever, something that pleases them that isn't like, negative. I just feel, that's so nice that they're happy. So.
Yeah. Yeah, we like to be around people who are happy or think people who are, doing things that bring them a lot of joy, success. Yeah. Yeah.
To counter a lot of self-criticism, I've started to rejoice every day, thinking in 4 ways. One is how much I've changed through Dharma practice. The second is what virtue I've done that day. Third is the good qualities that I've seen in myself and want to continue to develop. And the fourth is my potential.
Wonderful.
So that's been really helpful to do.
I rejoice in how thoughtful you are. No, seriously. Venerable, now I put together this morning reflection that I've just added to, and I have found that to be so beneficial. So thank you for that. Okay, so rejoicing can be part of our practice of cherishing others, and so it supports our bodhisattva ideals. And it's a very skillful psychological method for happiness, and really should be an important part of our Dharma practice every day, like you're suggesting there, so thank you. All right, then go to the next slide. Next one. So Rinpoche ends this section with some advice. He says, because you have the precious gift of a human body, and because you have the Buddha potential within your heart, you have the ability to bring tremendous and lasting benefit to yourself and all other beings. But if you do not apply these Dharma practices in your daily life, you have cut off all these benefits. So that's a nice bit of encouragement. So that can encourage us to rejoice as we go through our day. Okay, then this last section, or the next section, is called Using Problems to Purify Negative Karma. That's a little bit different than how it's listed in Shantideva's verse. I think it's more like negativity is shunned. You want to turn away from non-virtue. But it is a fact that when we experience any kind of suffering, we're exhausting a karmic seed, or we're lessening a karmic seed. I don't know that it necessarily means we're completely finishing that seed, but we're exhausting some karma. So if we go back to that formula that I was describing, I think 2 weeks ago, how really at the beginning of all of our actions is some kind of self-exaggeration, self-grasping ignorance that leads to, usually it leads to afflictions. It can also lead to contaminated positive states of mind too. They're going to be motivated by that ignorance, but usually it leads to afflictions, and then of course that leads to actions. The actions leave karmic seeds on our mind stream, and then there are a lot of results, suffering results. So suffering, if we think about that, suffering is a result. I think it makes it easier to think about suffering in those terms because it's less personal. It's not like I'm a failure because I have this problem. It's more like, oh, this is the ripening of some cause, either most likely from some previous life, not this life, but our actions in this life, our thoughts in this life could be a condition for causing that seed to ripen. So when we are experiencing a problem, maybe there's someone in front of us who's saying things we don't want to hear, or someone asking us to do something we don't want to do, whatever the situation may be, to remember that they are only a condition. They are not the cause of my suffering. Is so powerful. To remember that the substantial cause of any suffering we experience, it comes back to a karmic seed in our own mind stream. Now again, this is very strong medicine, and if you think about it, mind training, and that's the vantage point that Rinpoche is coming from in this book. Mind training is a Mahayana practice. It's a great scope practice. It assumes a lot of foundational understanding. So if some of these teachings sound a little bit too challenging or too harsh, then maybe we need to go back and really emphasize some of those more foundational practices that we find, like precious human rebirth and karma, those sorts of things, looking at, slowly moving towards thinking about true suffering, true origin of suffering, and those topics that then build up the foundation so that these topics, the antidotes that are being suggested with mind training have a place to land. So when we say all my problems come from my negative karma, that could sound pretty heavy, right? That almost sounds like blame, or I deserve to suffer. No one deserves to suffer, ever. No one deserves. We don't use that word. But if you think about it in terms of, well, this is just a ripening of a cause that has been created sometime in the past, and now it's finishing, it's exhausting, and I want to make sure I'm not creating more of the same causes, and really guarding my mind in that regard. So one way to approach this, of course, is to come back to the 4 general characteristics of karma and to try to apply them to our present problems. Have any of you done that before? I've not specifically thought about the 4 general characteristics like in a list. Maybe one of them will pop up, or 2 of them, but not applying all 4. So that's what Rinpoche is suggesting here as an antidote. So just reviewing those 4 general characteristics, karma is definite, that happiness comes from virtue, unhappiness, displeasure comes from non-virtue. And I love this part of Buddhism, that it's so, in a way, this is what makes it so scientific, that causes have results. And our mind is a result, isn't it? Our mind is impermanent, so it necessarily has causes. Happiness has causes, unhappiness has causes, and not just random causes that come out of the blue, but compatible, concordant kind of causes. So we have our own direct experience of this. Like when we're in a good mood, we treat people very kindly. The reciprocity is usually positive, isn't it? But we're in a bad mood, we disregard people, we look down on people, like with pride, then we get something similar back. So this can be quite sobering, but it also can be quite liberating, because then we're the ones who can make the changes. We can bring about the changes in our own mind. And then the second one is karma is expandable. That even from a small seed, you can get a huge tree. And the same is true with karmic actions, even small, potent karmic actions, depending on all the aspects, all the things that come together, all the conditions of that action can bring about a great result, both positive and negative. If we haven't created a cause, we won't experience the result. This is mind training right there. So when we experience some good result, we can think, well, I've created a cause for it. Not to get arrogant, not to get proud. This is just a result of some virtue that I've created. And when something negative happens, not to get all despondent and depressed and wigged out, but rather to think, okay, it's just the ripening of a result. It's not going to last forever. And I can do things to work with my mind not to create this again. And then the 4th one is, once created, karma is never lost. And this one is a little bit different than nature, because some seeds can go to waste. I've just planted a bunch of small tomato seeds, and some of them didn't come up. So that shows that those seeds had gone to waste. But karma is different. It's non-physical, and so maybe because of that reason, it doesn't disintegrate like a physical seed might over time. So we can apply our understanding of these 4 properties to any problem that arises in our life. And it's interesting that Rinpoche chose as an example the experience of disharmony in a relationship. That's getting a little personal, isn't it? And although, here we don't necessarily have romantic relationships, we do have a lot of relationships with each other that we're trying to maintain and improve like that. So he says, disharmony in relationship can arise due to having engaged in some form of sexual misconduct in the past. Whoa, that's powerful. So keep in mind that when we talk about unkind or unwise sexual conduct, that's really talking about adultery. That's the main conduct there that we're addressing. So someone who's in a committed relationship goes outside of that relationship and has a sexual relation with somebody else. That's considered adultery. That's really what we're looking at. It's not the only cause, but it's a likely cause. So he says, when there are many problems and quarrels in our relationship, we can think about them in terms of karma. So there are, if I looked in the Lamrim Chemo, and I found that there were several sutras where the Buddha described the results of the 10 non-virtues. I think it's good. I appreciate Venerable Kadru always tracing back to try to find a source from the Buddha. And there were a couple of sutras mentioned there that talked about the causally concordant results, the environmental results, and even the fruitional results. So use that as a resource in your study of karma. And in the Lamrim, it states that the corresponding result of sexual misconduct is to live with a very troublesome spouse, unfaithful and unruly, or contentious and difficult to get along with. Does that ring a bell for anybody? Past lives, of course, not as monastics. As monastics, we don't have these kind of difficulties now, but we can think back to the relationships that we've had, right? And did you always get along perfectly with your boyfriend or girlfriend or partner or spouse? Probably not. And did you ever attribute your quarreling to past sexual misconduct? Probably not. No, it's the other person's fault. So that's interesting. It's a possibility, it's not 100% a cause and result kind of relationship, but it's a possibility that that was a condition. I remember many years ago when Venerable was first teaching this section of the Lamrim, or the first time I heard her teach it, after the class, I was talking with one of the other participants, and she said, "Oh, this explains so much about my life. I'm so happy to hear this." I think she had a partner that was cheating on her, and she was able to take it in as something that she could work with. So, next slide. So Rinpoche goes through these 4 general characteristics, specifically in relation to sexual misconduct. And he says, think of problems in this way. I have created negative karma, so I will definitely experience its results. So when we're reflecting on karma and we're thinking about all the times that we can remember that we've killed, or all the times we remember taking things that weren't freely given, all those, we can imagine, okay, those seeds may be on our mind stream, or we've begun to purify them, but what about previous lives too? There's a lot in there to take care of. So this is talking about, if I have created negative karma, I will definitely experience the result unless I purify it. So karma is definite. That's what's pointing to here. Karma is definite. The more conviction we have in these 4 general characteristics, the more they're likely to arise in our mind as reasons, as explanations, as antidotes for the things that we experience. And even if our relationships now are good, we still have these seeds on our mind stream. So we can use this information to, target our purification practices, really hone in on those, so that we avoid, quarreling in the future, for instance. He says, the reason I have been experiencing these problems again and again for such a long time is that karma can expand. It can grow with time if it's not purified. So a general explanation of this characteristic is that, they use the example of the seed. One little seed can turn into not only a seedling, but then it grows lots of leaves, and then it grows, well, let's say it's a tree. It grows branches, it grows leaves on the branches, it grows trunk. Think of all the different parts that come from one little seed. And then, usually an acorn is used because it's so small and gives rise to such a big tree. And then if you think about it, season after season, there are harvests of thousands and thousands of new acorns. So one little seed, that's sobering to think about how karma can expand. But another way we could think about karma expanding is that, like when we look at the four general, or the 10 paths of action, sorry, and how each one of them, if all the branches are complete, can give rise to 4 different results. That's one way that we can think about karma expanding as well. So because karma tends to be a very subtle subject, it's very difficult for us to really get our heads around, then the Buddha told lots of stories. And so if stories work for you, then read lots of stories. Like I was reading this book called Hungry Ghosts recently, and it was talking about some of the results of actions from miserliness. That's why I was thinking about that. And those stories are potent. I don't want to be a hungry ghost. I don't want to experience that suffering. So I did find it inspiring for my awareness. But maybe stories aren't so powerful for you, so then think more about the logic and reasoning to bring about greater conviction. Okay, and then he says, everything in my life now has a cause, for instance, from committing sexual misconduct. In the past, my relationship is full of quarrels now, and if I had practiced the perfections of virtue and morality in the past, my life would now be happy and harmonious. Because I have not created this good karma and have instead created bad karma, I am suffering now. So if we haven't created the cause, we will not experience the result. Or if we have created a cause and haven't purified it or damaged it, then it will lead to result. So we can damage virtue, can't we? By generating anger. We can also damage non-virtue. We create karma with our mind. So it stands to reason we can address karma with our own mind. I like that kind of reasoning. It doesn't mean that we're a bad person because we're experiencing these things in our life. It just means we've created causes. And then finally he says, remember that karma is never lost. Even though it may be 100 eons before you experience the results, the karma we have accumulated never disappears. When the right time and perfect conditions occur, the karma will ripen and you will experience its effect. So again, thinking about, yeah, that's true if we don't purify non-virtue and if we don't damage virtue. That's what will be, that's what will happen. So I found it very helpful to go through the Lamrim and look at all the different karmic results of the 10 non-virtues and put them in a chart. And then I use that periodically as a glance meditation. And I find that very effective. It's easy just to, forget about those results. But there are causally concordant results similar to the habit. We'll have those habits again. All of these, like all of the Dharma, we have to keep putting it in front of our mind again and again and again. Why? Because we've done the opposite countless times as well. Okay, so then the next slide. What do we do then, knowing that even if we do not create any new negative karma, we still have to experience the eons of negative karma that we've already created? And he says the answer is purification. So luckily here at the Abbey, we do the practice of the 35 Buddhas every morning and a fair number of nights as well. We also have an annual Vajrasattva retreat did you get a lot of benefit this year? It was amazing. Well, it depends on your mind. I thought it was amazing this year, and you were nodding too. So, and then there's also the possibility of doing the Vajrasattva Nunru, 100,000 recitations of that mantra that can really bring about a good amount of purification. In the next slide. So with all purification practices, these are all based on the 4 opponent powers, and we're familiar with those, and we just have to keep applying them. The power of reliance, the Buddha, and also all ordinary sentient beings. The power of regret, clear regret, not guilt. We're not trying to beat ourselves up by calling to mind the negativities we've done. We're identifying them so that we can purify them. And then the power of the antidote. Whatever virtue we're doing can become an antidote. Lama Yeshe used to say that every virtue is an antidote. And in a way that's true. It's protecting our mind from non-virtue. But specifically, the powerful purification comes from very strong four opponent powers. And then the power of the resolve that really brings the determination to do something different in the future. That's an important ingredient. Yeah. Okay, so this is how he's suggesting to use these four opponent powers as a way to deal with problems when they come up in our life. All right. So kind of went through that fast, but it's a review for most of us. Any comments about that? Any stories you have of using this kind of antidote to work with problems that come up? Yeah.
The one thing that I was thinking about one cause of destroying seeds of virtues, and I'm trying to be very careful with, is like regretting, because just as we can regret a negative action, and this is one way to get purification from it, if I regret a virtuous action I've done, I can also destroy the seed. And this is something that I see in myself, even in the monastery. You give something to someone, or you're trying to help someone, and this person gets mad at you, or you give something to someone and you just put it in the trash right away, or give it to someone else. Then if I regret my generosity or what I was trying to do, then I kind of destroy the virtue that I was trying to create. So
Yeah.
I don't know, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, it's something to be really careful about, isn't it? Yeah, regret is one of those changeable mental factors that can go either way, depending on if we're regretting something virtuous or non-virtuous. Okay, so thanks for your patience today. So let's rejoice that we've had a chance to at least think about these things briefly. There are 3 antidotes that we could really spend time on and have them familiarized in our mind, habituated, so that they come up as soon as problems arise in our life, in our situations. So really rejoicing that Rinpoche has spelled these out so clearly for us to go back to again and again, and seeing that actually one of the benefits of problems is that we get to generate some virtue. We can transform these problems by any of these benefits. So we'll dedicate.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.